Live from SABC studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg. Welcome to this evening's episode of The Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvogo, and on the show tonight,
it has been said that the Commission was a mirror in which we as South Africans were able to see ourselves.
President Cyril Ramaphosa, a no-show at the country's premier anti-corruption summit, preferring rather to attend an ANC-NEC meeting where a report of the party's integrity committee on him was discussed. We bring you all the details, the analysis, as well as the optics of it all. The Anti-Corruption Summit, of course, wasn't the only place deprived of people it needed. The Eastern Cape legislature, too, couldn't pass the province's supplementary budget yesterday. Several MPLs, including the Premier, were attending to party political matters.
There is no report or work done by the Integrity Commission which will not serve before conference.
We also remember struggling hero Chris Hani. In a week, his comrades commemorated the day of his election as Communist Party secretary. And in the same week, his killer, Janusz Waluś, was released from prison on parole. We get reflections from SACP stalwart Ronnie Casserols. All that and more in tonight's episode of The Watchdog, which starts now. It's International Anti-Corruption Day. This year coming, of course, at a time the country is grappling with the report of the Chief Justice into state capture. The head of state, who was to have delivered a keynote address at that anti-corruption summit, was conspicuous in his absence, attending a meeting of the ANC's National Executive Committee, where a report on the Phala saga was to be discussed. But in his address at the summit, Chief Justice Raymond Zondo lamented corruption in the country. Zoleka Kodashe was there.
Speaking on the second day of the commemoration of International Anti-Corruption Day at UNISA, Chief Justice Zondo zoomed in on state-owned entities, including PRASA. In his state capture report, Zondo recommended the establishment of a commission of inquiry to investigate the corruption at the SOE. He says South Africans suffered a reality where they were not afforded safe, reliable, and essential transport due to maladministration, incompetence, and mismanagement.
PRASA is a very important state entity that was established in order to provide very essential transport to the people of South Africa, particularly poor people. But PRASA has not been able to provide a safe and reliable transport service to poor people in our country.
Professor Thuli Madonsela, the former public protector, was at the head of the Chapter 9 institution when it recommended the formation of a commission of inquiry into state capture. In her input, warned against relying on the courts to advocate for social justice and democracy.
Let's stop having the Constitutional Court being the one reminding us which law needs to be passed to tip the scale in favor of equality and in favor of the poor. You can look at all of those socioeconomic cases, the TAC cases, the equal education cases, Mahlangu. All of these cases point to the fact that we're not governing constitutionally some of the time. Not some, a lot of the time we are.
Lastly, Chairperson of the Public Service Commission, Professor Somadoda Figeni, has warned of the corrosive impact of corruption on South Africa, further highlighting how deeply entrenched corruption has become in the country.
So what is the moral code or immorality code of a society where funerals of liberation icons become corruption schemes? What is the moral or immorality code of a society where corruption goes on an overdrive during the existential crisis of COVID-19? And what is the morality or immorality code of a society where citizenship and some of the critical permits to be in the country can be sold for 500 rands, as if it's a clearance sale on a Black Friday?
Meanwhile, the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council says it has been hard at work since its establishment in August 2022. Hani Mapanga, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, in Nasrec, south of Johannesburg, where the president was, the governing party's National Executive Committee resolved not to release a report on the president's Phala saga. The ANC's Integrity Committee report, as we were told ahead of today's NEC meeting, was going to be tabled today. ANC National Spokesperson Bulemabe explains why that didn't happen.
Sometimes those reports of Integrity Commission are presented with decisions, or what you would refer to as recommendations. You know, so if the NEC affirms those decisions we've done it in the past in many instances, and those decisions were then implemented there and then. But discussions are then held. If reports require refining, they are refined and all of that. But you see, the NEC, where the Integrity Commission or cadres of the National Executive Committee have voluntarily submitted themselves before the Integrity Commission, it is only fair that the Integrity Commission brings those reports forward with their own observation and recommendations. A discussion is then held, and then if the NEC wants to take a position on those, it does so. And then through the statement that we issue at the conclusion of the NEC, we then convey what is the decision of the NEC, if there is a decision that the NEC needed to make around those reports that it shall have received.
Joining me on the line for some reflection on this story, which, of course, I broke about 2 hours ago or so, is political analyst Ribone Tau. Ribone, good evening. Thanks very much for your time. Let's start with what Bulemabe had to say there. I mean, we were, from what the ANC had told us, this report was going to be tabled before the National Executive Committee today, but from what Bulemabe said a couple of hours ago, that's not to be. It will be tabled at the party's conference in a week's time. What do you make of that?
Good evening, Boy, and good evening to the viewers at home. I think one must start by saying that it's clear that the National Executive Committee has rendered themselves not to be able to deal with the Phala matter. I mean, we also saw reports, I think today and yesterday, whereby one of the NEC members, Dr. Zolem Kize, saying that the NEC meeting was run like a mafia style, you know. People were not allowed to speak, you know, in the previous meeting around this issue. But also what is interesting, you must remember on the 13th of this month, there will be a sitting in Parliament, and the same NEC that is saying that they're taking this report of the Integrity Committee to the conference of the ANC, but on the other side in Parliament, they're saying that they will vote against. This indeed, yes, are two different reports. But at the end of the day, it's very interesting. There seem to be contradictions, you know, around the ANC, how it is handling its matters, this National Executive Committee.
Well, I mean, the parliamentary process is a separate one to that of the ANC, and as you will recall, Parliament even went out of its way to seek legal opinion as to whether they could continue with next week's debate. And the opinion, of course, was that, I mean, nothing precludes them from doing so. But they were basing that, or the reason Parliament went and sought legal opinion was also because the President has taken the panel's report on review as well. I think it's important to make that distinction, I think, for the sake of our viewers. But of course, I mean, you're correct in the other respect, in that we're all waiting or keen to see whether those within the ANC or those who Dr. Zweli Mkhize says were bullied, or however way he put it, you know, would then vote differently from what ANC MPs have actually been told or asked to vote.
No, absolutely. I mean, this will be a very interesting. I've been speaking to even some members of Parliament, who are saying, by the way, this report, they were part and parcel of it. These are ANC members, in Parliament, who are saying that it's very funny that because the report seems to be not in support of President Ramaphosa, now all of a sudden the ANC and NEC is saying that let's vote against it, but they were the ones who voted that there should be this process, when the discussions started in Parliament, but because this was a multi-party process, so that's what I'm saying. There's a lot of contradictions, and there's also a lot of lobbying, by the way, from what I hear from those who are members of Parliament, that people should actually vote for this report, because it is clear that the battle lines are drawn, and the ANC is not able, especially the NEC, able to deal with very complex matters. They are all emotional. There is no logic in everything that they are saying when they communicate, especially around the Pala matter.
Back to what happened today, as I said earlier in my introduction, from what we were told, the report of the Integrity Committee was indeed going to be tabled today, but that didn't happen. It's going to be tabled now, Bulemabe says, together with many other reports at conference next week. What is your reading of it? What do you think happened here?
I mean, let's start by saying that we saw the letter, for example, by the Electoral Committee that Batabile Dlamini posted on her social media account, that she's not eligible to contest, And it's clear that this Integrity Committee report was going to affect a lot of NEC members, from contesting next week. So, and I think that this is the biggest problem with the ANC. They tend to do things and later put themselves in a deeper crisis, because the Integrity Committee report, I don't know why is it only coming out now after nomination processes are done. There were rules by the Integrity Committee. I think there should have been a proper discussion between the Integrity Committee, the Electoral Committee, and the NEC, so that they avoid, because that thing has got a potential really of collapsing conference, because it is clear that also delegates will be instructed according to factional lines, how to fight, this integrity report, because a lot of NEC members might be affected by this and being told that they should not contest at this conference. So this has got a potential of exposing the ANC that it is not able to deal with very complex matters. They're not able to look at things from a different perspective. Everything they do is always inward looking.
Do you think, one would assume that Bulemabe was referring to the issues that involve the former ANC Women's League president, Batabile Dlamini, when he said that Cyril Ramaphosa's, or the Integrity Committee's report on Pala will, together with many other reports, go to the conference, which suggests to me, well, whatever the reason, whatever the logic of it all, but it suggests to me that what will be true for Cyril Ramaphosa will also, or should be true for a Batabile Dlamini, should be true for an Andile Lungisa, should be true for a Bongo, should be true for many other people. But I don't know, we were not able to explore that, I mean, with Pulemabe or any official of the conference. But is that what you mean when you say that it may just collapse or probably confuse even the conference come next week?
No, absolutely. I mean, if this integrity report, is tabled there, it's got a potential, of affecting those who are contesting, that on those bases they might say that they must withdraw or they're no longer eligible to contest. And you might find that 90% of that NEC can start pointing fingers at each other and saying that, listen, you also have got this scandal, you've got this scandal. That's what I'm saying, that the ANC left this thing to the 11th hour. They should have not left this thing to the 11th hour. They know that they've been dealing with issues around the Integrity Committee. Some of their comrades have been called there. And I mean, you've got people like, if you remember in the past, David Masondo also, at some point, the Integrity Committee said he should resign, from being Deputy Minister. He should also no longer be the head of political education. And those were not implemented. So, and that's why some people are saying that you've got the Integrity Committee, that it took less because those recommendations are not binding. So you've got the National Executive Committee, who is the reverend, the player, because this report most of the time are discussing or are about National Executive Committee members. So when every time they engage on them, it's a long factional battles. And I think that they did not want the meeting to collapse today or to degenerate. And that's why I think they opted to say, we are taking this to conference. And that means that they are saying themselves or admitting themselves that they can't deal with issues from a very principled manner. They are more factional. And that's why I think there was that consensus that let's take this thing to the branches of the ANC or to delegates of the ANC at this conference.
Watchdog, let me thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Okay, that's welcome to Watchdog, political analyst. Up next, a week to go to the much-awaited elective conference of the ANC. It would seem that government business in some instances is taking a backseat. We explore that issue in a moment. Don't go away. A week to go to the much-awaited elective conference of the ANC. Government business, it would seem, is taking a backseat in some instances. A case in point, the president's no-show at the anti-corruption summit today. And if you want another example, the Premier of the Eastern Cape was also not in the province today, attending the same meeting the president attended. And the legislature in that province yesterday couldn't pass the budget because the governing party didn't have a sufficient number of MPLs to vote for it. Listen to the leader of the opposition in that province, the leader Ngababanga, in a clip he sent out on social media.
The provincial legislature of the Eastern Cape can't pass a budget that is supposed to serve more than 6 million people in the Eastern Cape because of the ANC caucus, which cannot make a quorum. Now, the Provincial Assembly is on standstill. Members of Parliament are sitting outside who might wait here for hours and hours. Because all these members, what they've chose from the ANC, they've chose to go and campaign for CR22. This is how the ANC cares about the people of the Eastern Cape. Today, the entire province is held to standstill because of interest of serving the party than serving the people. We'll wait and wait for them for hours and hours to see whether all those who have left will come and join. It's a shame for the ANC in the Eastern Cape, whilst millions and millions of our people continue to suffer, and an ANC government that cannot provide them a budget.
Ngababanga joins us on the line, and also joining us on the line is the chief whip of the majority party in the province, the ANC that is, and that is Loyiso Maqashela. Mr. Maqashela, let me start with you, if I may. You heard what Mr. Banga had to say, or the allegations that he leveled against your party. What do you have to say for yourself?
Thank you so much, Will. Good evening to you and the viewers. I hope I'm audible.
You are, thank you. Peter, we couldn't get you on another line, but it's okay.
Okay. No, thanks, Will, once again. Look, I can just say it's just a grandstanding what has just been said yesterday by Mr. Bang. Because of one issue that I just want to put across here. Personally, I was not in the house because I attended an apology due to family commitments. One thing for sure, they were all in the house and the house proceedings took place very well. Noting the number of the ANC members in the house, that there were only 30, and for us to make the quorum, we have to be 33. I am not including any of the opposition parties in that number. That would be a majority that can pass an adjustment budget. They then, as the Democratic Alliance, together with the UDF, decided in their own accord to march out and enjoy themselves in the lobby, with all good intentions, with all the intentions to frustrate the passing of the budget, because they could count that we were only 30 and we were short of just 3 to make the quorum. Then he took it to social media as if they were waiting for members of the ANC, yet themselves they left deliberately and now pretending to be taking much care of the people of the Eastern Cape. Yet it is themselves who decided, because that budget is to be benefited by the downtrodden, the poorest of the poor. They themselves represent the well-to-do. Then they really care less, because should they have stayed in the house, he wouldn't have said what he is saying now, because they stayed there immediately. Let me bring something else to your attention. There was to be a closing function immediately after the voting. Once there had to be an adjournment now waiting for these ANC people to come, they then decided that let's proceed with the function. All those who marched out the DA, Mr. Banga himself included, they all attended the function, which then means to them what really matters most is the function above passing the budget. That will provide services to the people of the Eastern Cape. So that's just what I wanted to clear. It is true the budget we could not pass the budget yesterday because we did not make the quorum. And we can also give account of each and every member who did not form part. It is not true that we have just chosen to put above everything else the conference of the ANC, above all. It is just trying to, because once the conferences, you must know, it's a silly season. Everybody just wants to try and play into the gallery, which is what he has exactly done.
Okay.
Then we are vehemently opposed to that kind of grandstanding, and it does not serve the interest of the people of the Eastern Cape, as he claims that they represent them. Thank you.
Ngababanga, why did you grandstand?
It's not grandstanding, it's part of our work. What was a shame about what happened is that the Premier of the Eastern Cape went to Engobo with a contingent of ANC MPs to go and address 89 branches for him to campaign to be a deputy president of the African National Congress. He left behind an 89.6 million rand budget that was supposed to be passed by the ruling party, the majority, which they were given a mandate by the people to serve them and pass and govern. Instead, they chose to go to a party meeting, and they couldn't pass a budget. We sat from each and every budget vote. We debated. We supported some budget items. We opposed some budget items. When the budget appropriation of 89.6 billion was supposed to be passed, where we extremely opposed that budget. What we wanted to do to show them that if you do not amend the budget according to the things that we want to do, we are not going to allow you to pass a budget where 100,000 the learners are not going to be financed in January for scholar transport, poor kids, where the Department of Health continue to fund the medical legal fund without financing goods and services in our hospitals. Our hospitals are suffering. We're saying put more money there. Where the Department of Education have underspent 300 million rand, which was supposed to be addressing issues that relate to infrastructure, building toilets and building schools, maintaining schools, where the ANC government have failed. We're asking them difficult questions. They decided to go and serve 89 branches in Engcobo, and the Premier was there. It's a shame, because we have to make the African National Congress accountable for them to understand that the people of the Eastern Cape, the 6 million people, are more important than the party. We have exposed them, that they don't care about the poor people of the Eastern Cape, the 540,000 young people in the Eastern Cape that are unemployed, the 86.9% of young people who have given up looking for jobs, the 45%, half of the population of the Eastern Cape, which is looking for work and which are unemployed. This is the kind of a ruling party that prefers party events than the interests of the people. We have exposed them, the EFF, the UDM, and all parties.
Okay, Mr. Makashela, I mean, surely, I mean, they do reserve the right to differ with you or oppose the budget even. So you needed your members to actually pass the budget. Is that not the case?
That's absolutely true, because we're not depending on any one of them to run the government of the Eastern Cape. Yes. It was unfortunate that they played into that space when only 3 members to make the quorum were not available in the House.
But why, if I may ask, why did those 3 members not prioritize, you know, the work of the government?
Let me clarify this. The Premier was in the House. There is a development in Engcobo, a new spark that has been opened with a filling station. The Premier was invited to go and open that officially. He attended that function. There's less about addressing 89 branches. In actual fact, Engcobo has got 20 branches if there was to be any correction to that. Then it was after the event, late in the evening, when that meeting was addressed by the Premier, because, of course, he was not going to not address branches of the ANC when he's in that space.
But can I come in there, if I may? I mean, surely the opening... Mr. Makashela, just one... sorry to barge in, but surely, I mean, the opening of a spa cannot supersede the passing of a budget in the legislature, unless I'm getting this wrong.
Look, it's correct what you are saying, but it's also good that when investors have come into our area, because we always create environment conducive for investment to take place, those people of Engcobo, they also need that facility, they need that service. Hence, the head of government in the province had to go open it officially, because we did not anticipate that there will be this, because if you listen to Mr. Banga, he says they supported others' votes, they did not support others. Now, I'm saying those members equally, much as they would need the passing of the budget, also they deserve and they need such a service in a rural town like the Engobo. So let's put that one aside. I'm therefore saying other members have got problems they had to attend. Then we thought we would be in a better position because to pass the budget. Even those that he speaks about of the EFF, it had to be Mr. Banga who called their national leadership to tell them not to vote for the budget, and yet they came rushing with good intentions to vote for the passing of the budget. It is him who was deliberately making sure that we do not pass the budget. Anyway, let me put it this way. Monday, this coming Monday, we have in our programming today agreed that on Monday we are passing that budget. If there would be anything, that would be a delay. It would be a delay of a day because that adjustment budget, you cannot explain a cent if it has not been passed. Now, we will be delaying by this day, the Friday. Then on Monday, we're having that legislature, that house sitting and passing the budget, finished and clear, with them or without them. So we will not be bothering whether they come or they don't. So we will be bringing our majority as voted by the people.
Okay, gentlemen, let's leave it there for tonight. Thanks to both of you for agreeing to come on the program. And that's, of course, the ANC's Chief Whip in the Eastern Cape Legislature, Loyiso Matlashela. Also part of the conversation was Ngcobo Banga, who is the leader of the official opposition, the Democratic Alliance, in the province. Yesterday, the legislature could not pass the budget because they couldn't muster the requisite number of votes for that to go through. So another sitting would have to be scheduled. And the allegation from the official opposition is that the ANC was attending to party matters and not prioritizing government matters, something, of course, as you heard from Mr. Matlashela there, that the ANC vehemently denies. Up next, we remember struggle hero Chris Hani. In a week, his comrades commemorated his election as Communist Party Secretary 29 years ago. And in the same week that his killer, Janusz Waluś, was released from prison on parole. Yesterday, 29 years ago, South African communists elected Chris Hani as their General Secretary. Hardly a year later, he was assassinated in cold blood. A couple of days ago, his killer, Janusz Waluś, was released from prison on parole. We get some reflections from SACP stalwart Ronnie Casserols, who joins us on the line. Good evening, Mr. Casserols. Thank you very much for your time.
It's a pleasure. Good evening to you and the viewers.
29 years is a long time, but it does sound like, feel like it was only yesterday, especially in a week like this one, that got people talking once again on the back, of course, of the release of his killer on parole.
Well, it's very hard to stomach, obviously, and one feels for his family, particularly. One feels for the Communist Party that was robbed most cruelly of its most outstanding leader and of the country. Chris had a great, tremendous following within the ANC, the trade union movement, and the wider population. And to this day, the family, the party, ANC, are not satisfied that there was full information forthcoming, and the belief that the actions of Wallace, Derby Lewis extended beyond them to a circle of right-wing fanatics, and for that reason they've been pressing for his continued incarceration. And it came as a great shock. It's a bitter pill to follow. Obviously, one abides by the laws of the country, But, you know, I have a very particular question to pose in terms of the Correctional Services Department and the Parole Board. Has Waluś rehabilitated? Has he recanted? Does he really regret this despicable action that he carried out? That isn't so clear. We note that he's not signing conditions of his parole, and that could actually signify that he's not happy or prepared to remain in the country in terms of such a ruling under parole conditions for 3 years, yearning to get back to Poland, where he's hailed as a hero. This is one of the most extreme right-wing anti-communist countries in Europe. And people have been regaling him, talking about naming streets after him, establishing statues to this character. And, you know, in the light of this, and the fact that he seems to want to be getting there as quickly as possible, one is really doubting what is in this man's mind. Somebody who qualifies for parole has to pass the test of recantation. And we need to get that clear from the Parole Board and Correctional Services in order to be absolutely clear about what actually has led to this decision. Because if he has not recanted, then we just project a fanatical, anti-communist, racist, white supremacist back into society, and at least here, he'd be under some kind of control. Back in Poland, nothing whatsoever, in fact, the opposite.
Well, I mean, hopefully, I mean, those questions around regret, remorse, full disclosure, and so on will be answered. I mean, as you know, there's an application currently before the Constitutional Court, you know, filed by the Hani family and the South African Communist Party, and I think it goes to the heart of those issues and questions. I mean, raises issues of process and so on. But let's go back to, I mean, the man. What made Chris Hani Chris Hani?
He was the most extraordinary human being. A young person who came out of rural poverty and obscurity to become a household name, household word in our country, and in fact beyond our borders. And that's because of the qualities that developed through his involvement with the ANC Communist Party and his movement in dedicated, determined, courageous struggle. That's what shaped him. His hatred of injustice, standing up against all odds for the rights of the people of South Africa. For him, the working class to the fore, the urban and rural poor, these were the forces that he saw could really change the situation, in fact did. And he threw himself into the thick of that struggle for his whole adult life. In the process, he became totally trusted by the masses of our people, and they were prepared to follow him. He was disciplined. He wasn't adventuristic or irresponsible. He accepted the decisions within the movement of his. He became a great leader as a result of the qualities and the record of service. And one of these people who had utmost integrity, absolute honesty, and a commitment to the best qualities of that liberation struggle, and that was to serve the people, serve their interests first and foremost. You know, Chris had a wonderful sense of humor. He was a very warm, loving person, very easy to get on with. And all of us have our stories about him and our memories about what made him and what kind of a person and comrade and a brother he was to everybody in the movement, young and old, male and female. He was a great champion of the rights of women and of children, and stood up against all manner of prejudice, of discrimination, and especially the question of oppression and inequality, oppression and exploitation. So he had become beloved by our people, and those who sought to snuff him out from elements, certainly within what we were calling the third force then, right-wing elements within the state, within the security apparatus, within military intelligence and so on. They certainly didn't want to see Chris Hani becoming an obstacle to a moderate change in the country. And of course, this is why there's such questions about whether those who were behind the man who pulled the trigger extended beyond Wallace and Darby Lewis. But if I can tell you just a little anecdote about Chris that I remember, and there are many. I was in the camp Kongwa in the interior of Tanzania. We'd both come back to Tanzania after training in the Soviet Union. We were there in 1965. And Oliver Tambo summons the two of us to Dar es Salaam. It was a journey of many hours by military vehicle and so on, because he had a task for us. And he wanted us, he set us to work in a back room, reading huge volumes of guerrilla warfare and counterinsurgency in history and around the world, and to make reports on this, to have discussions with him at the end of every day, certainly end of every week. We had to write up précis of these books, etc., in order to see what the ANC could learn from it. You know, at the end of the day, I was absolutely bushed, exhausted. We'd leave late, already into the evening, maybe have a little stroll and a bite to eat. I liked to have a cold beer. He was a teetotal, totally. And we'd get back to our digs. I would collapse on my bed. Chris Hani would be reading after 12, 14 hours of reading on guerrilla warfare. He would take out his beloved collected works of Shakespeare, and he would read for at least a couple of hours. His favorite book, Shakespeare book, was Hamlet. And that is the prince who is conflicted to be or not to be, to do or not to do, to act or not to act. And this was something that he lived with. And he was so engrossed in this question of, do you act or do you not act? The fact that you had to act, he linked theory and practice. And, you know, we would talk to so many different people about Shakespeare, and he's always joking, and he had this astute mind of understanding what the Shakespearean, the bard, was giving to humanity in terms of those particular classics and how they applied to our struggles. So one remembers all this about him to such a degree, as though it was yesterday, and one can never overcome this, so we never forget it. And therefore, when it comes to his family, our heart bleeds for them. The fact that they lost him at the young age of 50, he was in his prime, and the Communist Party lost a great leader who could have made a huge difference to where we are in the country today.
Let's talk then a bit about, you know, where we are. And I'm not going to ask that question because I think it's unfair and really not a proper question to ask, to say, what would Chris be saying today? What would Chris be doing? Where would he be, you know, right now, given everything else happening in this country and around us? But what, from his ethos, from that astute mind, from what everything he came to represent, what do you think where you think a lot of people have lost the plot currently, you know, that which someone like Chris came to represent?
Yeah, well, of course, you're right. Nobody can put words into his mouth. But of course, any person and somebody who was a leader of that caliber, whether a leader or not, of course, we've got a right to assess how they would have dealt with, not details, no one can guess that, and the twists and turns and so on at every phase. But certainly, a person who lived by principles, a person who was thoroughly honest, who had an integrity deep down, who had value system that he totally stuck to through thick and thin. It wasn't easy to stick to principles and those values through all those difficult years of struggle and exile and so on. But he was consistent in that and consistent in always putting the interests of the people above his own particular interests. So from that point of view, he's a wonderful example for all of us and for the youth of our country. And I have no doubt whatsoever, along with lots of other people from the previous generation who were steeled in the struggle, were committed, were prepared to face all sorts of danger, and were honest as long as the day is long throughout, who never gave us cause for suspicion about their characters, about their nature, because there were people who served and who sacrificed, went to prison, faced dangers, but yes, you know, and I'm not going to name names now, and they're very obvious, who somehow one felt, well, you know, this particular character slips up here and there's certain aspects that one is not 100% happy with. With Chris's value system and commitment, one never deviated from belief in him, as was the case for Lillian and Goya, for Brian Fisher, for Ruth First, Moses Katani, J.B. Marks. We can go on and on. Babla Saluji, Yusuf Dadu, etc., etc. I'm really wanting to show that it was a whole diversity. And it's all of those people, including Chris, who one feels confident would have been an absolute center of the finest virtues and would have stood up against those who were deviating because of their self-interest, because some of them who even spoke unblushingly about, well, you know, they didn't join the struggle to be poor. You know, these were the early signs in the 90s. One remembers a rape case, for instance, at a certain point in time. And one can feel totally confident and sure that the likes of Chris Hani would have been absolutely steadfast and would have acted as an anchor for the movement, with a strong will and dedication to oppose the slide down, the regression that we've unfortunately seen, particularly in the onset of Polokwane and the Zuma years, but some even pre that. So I'm not putting words into his mouth. I'm giving a judgment about somebody I knew, and I'm not making exception. There are lots and lots of other people, and some certainly alive today, who served with that kind of virtue and commitment, and Chris Hani did 100%.
Have to ask you this in the minutes that we have, just under, that does would you say the ANC still has that caliber of people, in spite of what we're seeing in the country today?
You know, Vuyo, they've got to prove themselves. They've got to stand up and speak up. And, you know, it's been a long time since the beginning of the downslide, and too many remain silent and perhaps are talking now. And we do see some excellent comrades. I'm not going to start naming names because there are people, men and women, who are speaking up in various ways and attempting late in the day to try and do their best to rescue the movement. So yes, there are, but you know, they've been weaker, and I say this with all due respect, in terms of timing, in terms of the fact that there wasn't really the coming together of a strong organizational group. I'm talking about within the ANC. I certainly feel, and by the way, I've been reintroduced into the leadership of the Communist Party recently after their Congress. Their 15th Congress in July. They asked me to come back into the Central Committee as an augmented member. And I must say, and I've been telling this to comrades around, that I've been really impressed with the younger people within the Communist Party of South Africa who are showing that there is an awakening, that there is a commitment. And it's not just them there. By the way, one is infused by young people across the boards in this country who are showing the kind of qualities that, you know, they're not tested the way Chris was, but they're certainly showing that kind of concern and the need to understand, analyze, and act, which are the lessons of Chris Hani, but above all, the integrity, the commitment to serve the people. So in a sense, I must say that despite the bleakness and the deep hole that the ANC has got into, and you know, the liberation movement as a whole, kind of corruption sweeping the country, I do have hope. It's not just fanciful. I do see signs of this. But in terms of Chris Hani, what I will say, put words into his mouth, he would say that the organization of the working class is the key. And that's the key, not just for the Communist Party or COSATU or SAFTU or certainly the ANC, but it's that commitment, that work with the organized labor to bring them to the fore once again that can save this country. They are the social force that can do it and can rally people, the young, the intelligentsia, and people across the color line. Okay. The diversity in this country, I think that's how Chris Hani would be seeing it today. I'm saying, I think.
Okay, I've seriously overrun, but I have you ask you this, and I wanted to answer it in 10 seconds. Do you think such people, the people you've identified, you've seen that are giving you, or that have given you hope, will prevail at the ANC conference next week, and that political party will come out of that conference a better party than it is today? Can you say that categorically?
To be brief, I'm really not sure. The jury's really out on that. The list that the delegates have chosen, the 200, I think is probably the worst list I've seen in terms of nominations. People within the ANC have to wake up and they have to choose people who really have the courage, the commitment and the honesty to change it. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. I'm not terribly optimistic immediately on that score, but I hope it happens.
Let's leave it there. Thank you so much for your time this evening. Rona Castro, South African Communist Party and ANC stalwart, reflecting on the life of Chris Hani, who today, I mean, the SACP commemorated this week, the 29th year, which 29 years ago, he was, of course, elected SACP General Secretary, of course, reflecting on that, but also in the same week that Chris Hani's killer, Janusz Waluś, was released on parole. That's our show for tonight and for this week. Do join us again on Monday. Have a great weekend.